I dreamed of being just like the other girls in my high school, the ones who seemed to effortlessly have the things I longed for. Not just the home and the clothes and looks, but the ability to walk around in this life as if they belonged. They had a confidence I desperately looked for on the discount shelves at drugstores and envied on the pages of Lyle's Playboy magazines. Most of all, they were happy and carefree, and seemed so sure that the world was a good and kind place, full of good and kind people. They were all Baileys, and I was always the awkward girl being chased by geese. I was also a virgin, and at 14, I desperately wanted not to be. Maybe this was going to be the magic thing that made me a different person. I had watched my mom use her sexuality as a tool, and I heard the other girls talking about having sex, so it felt like yet another world I was being kept out of. All I knew about sex was that the first time was going to hurt, and there would be blood. I wasn't so worried about pain or blood, but I didn't want to experience either with someone that I was having sex with. That seemed more mortifying to me than actually being naked and doing the deed. I wanted to be cool and sexy and beautiful the first time, not worried about bleeding on someone's sheets. I decided the best way to control for possible embarrassment was to de-virginize myself first. I couldn't talk to my mom about it, and my older sisters were too far away and caught up in their own lives to help me with this problem. Plus, it wasn't the sort of thing we talked about easily or ever. I waited until everyone was out of the house, and then I went into the bathroom where I could lock the door. I turned on the shower and stripped down. I didn't like to look at my body in the mirror, so I quickly got in the water. My hands were shaking as I picked up the small squeeze bottle of shower gel. It was pink with tiny daisy-like flowers on it. I squirted some in my left hand and then popped the flip-top lid into place with my right thumb. I pressed down on it tightly and hoped it was sealed enough that it wouldn't pop open. I soaped up my body between my legs, and then I coated the bottle itself with its own gel. I took a deep breath, and then I inserted the bottle as far as I could. It scraped and hurt, but I pushed it in as far as it would go, and then I took a deep breath and pushed it in even further. When I pulled it out, there was blood on the lid and more blood running down my leg. I dropped it and sat down in the shower, letting the warm water run across my back and shoulders. I waited to see if I felt any different, but all I felt was the stinging of the gel inside me. With the messy part out of the way, I decided to do it for real with Liam. He was the stepbrother of a kid in my grade, and we started going together, which didn't mean much of anything at the time. We'd talk on the phone, but the conversation was full of awkward pauses, and he never really asked me out on a proper date. We'd just meet up at house parties, but even so, I considered him my boyfriend. I was the one who brought up the topic of sex, and he seemed reserved and shy about it. Please, I'd say, let's just do it. It will be great. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't much of anything, and it was over in a few minutes. Liam was quiet after, so I was quiet, and we were both awkward. But I was happy. I had a boyfriend officially, I was a woman, and maybe I was even in love. I didn't know what love was supposed to feel like, so this vague feeling would have to do. I wanted Liam to tell me he loved me, that he'd never leave me, that I was his best girl in the world. But Liam wasn't much of a talker, and the longest conversation we ever had was when he called to tell me he had cheated on me with a girl from church and was breaking up with me. I hung up the phone just as my mom brought out my birthday cake. She immediately got out her camera to capture me blowing out the candles and making a wish, but all she got was a picture of me crying onto a cake that read "Happy 15th birthday." I didn't make a wish. My fantasy that somehow Hef and I would develop a real relationship was over not long after our season of The Girls Next Door premiered. This wasn't a relationship, it was a job. And as soon as I accepted that reality, my panicky feelings began to lessen. My job was to perform. I performed on his television show, for Hef's friends and guests, and for him, in his bedroom. The sex never changed, only the faces. The silk pajamas, the 4 big television screens with the same old porn reels playing, Hef getting into bed and reaching for the baby oil. We were all getting infections from the baby oil. It wasn't supposed to be used as lube. I tried to tell him. I begged Mary to tell him. But you couldn't really tell him anything he didn't want to hear. We tried to replace the baby oil with lube, but when we weren't looking, he would always switch it back. He kept a doctor on retainer who would come when called to give us antibiotics. To avoid infections, I sometimes resorted to anal sex when it was my turn to straddle Hef. I don't think he could ever tell the difference, and it helped me avoid a host of frontal issues. It wasn't always the easiest, but it was the best solution I could think of. The sex had become like everything at the mansion, part of my job. I knew by then exactly what he liked, how he wanted me to move, what I should sound and look like, and so I did it. Sometimes, though, I was shocked that he actually fell for it. How could he not see that for all of us, it was an act? Did he really think we were enjoying it? Somehow he actually did. I found myself wondering, did he just assume this was what everyone liked? Because it's what he liked? Or was he just this self-obsessed? Or maybe he just didn't care. He seemed less sex-savvy than some of the teenage boys I'd been with years ago, when I was just figuring out how to have fun with my sexuality, how to please someone else and help them to please me, too. It was clear to me that Hef had never taken a moment in his entire life to figure out how to please someone else. Even the first time, the sex hadn't exactly been fun, but there'd been a thrill to it, a sense of possibility, of doing something wild, something unusual. It felt young and sexy and free. The Playboy Mansion had a reputation, a legacy as one of the first sex-positive, liberated places. Now, I wondered if that place had ever really existed. Hef's public persona, the narrative that everyone bought into, was of a powerful man who used that power to elevate women, fight for civil rights, and champion the First Amendment. He was the poster boy for sexual liberation. I never felt very liberated in his bedroom. He always framed it as a choice. But of course, he also reminded you that the opportunity was in the staying. But the longer you stayed, the more hoops you jumped through, and the more you were programmed to believe that you would be nothing if you left. It was an invisible trap, framed by the language of choice. I didn't believe in the happily ever after. I walked over to the empty birdcage that hung in the corner of the bathroom. When I first got there, it had had 2 lovebirds in it. They were small and bright green, with the sweetest little rosy cheeks. I loved how pretty they were, and that they supposedly had a very strong pair bond, where they would fall in love and be loyal to each other. The problem was, they kept dying. Every time one of them turned up dead on the cage floor, lying there as still as a little green banana, the staff would whisk it away and replace it with a new, live bird. The new pair would have to rebond with each other now that the previous partner was gone. But then another one would die. Nobody had any idea what was going on. And finally, they stopped replacing the birds. I finally went and looked the cage over, searching for some reason that they were dying, other than the fact there was no sunlight in the bathroom at all. Maybe something had been overlooked because of how fast the staff had to clean when they came into Hef's room. He was turning into something of a hoarder with stacks of papers and files and photos and books building up all over the bedroom, to the point that the sunlight coming in the windows would bleach the carpet all around the stacks, leaving a bright square of fresh red underneath. The staff was overwhelmed, and it was all they could do to dust and vacuum and keep things down to a dull roar. The birds got overlooked. It turned out there was something wrong with the watering device. A bottle with a little metal straw. There was a metal P at the end of the straw that allowed the water to flow out when a bird pecked it. But it had gotten stuck. The thing wouldn't dispense water. That was it. Such an easy thing to fix. But nobody noticed. The birds had been dying of thirst this whole time, and the mansion staff just kept replacing them, bird after bird. In one book, I found one of the millions of letters that people wrote to Hef over his 91 years. It's from a 6th grade girl named Mackenzie, who writes to Hef that she's 11 years old and watches The Girls Next Door. It's her favorite show. I have a dream to become a playmate, she writes. It will always be my lifelong dream. She said in the letter that on her 13th birthday, she's going to buy herself a Playboy bunny bedspread. My mom always tells me that she's always going to support me through my dreams. I can feel the tears start behind my eyes as I keep reading. Hef, my 2 big questions are, how old do you have to be to come live in the Playboy Mansion? And what do you have to do to get in the mansion? Anyways, I'll always love the mansion and you. I'll love you forever. There was a picture of her in a school uniform, blonde and smiling, her hair sticking up a little in the back, her school tie in a loose knot at the front. I sat down on the floor and stared at Mackenzie's picture. I didn't cry for the picture of me, but I cried for the picture of Mackenzie. I cried for any part I had in making the mansion Mackenzie's biggest dream, for any way I contributed to inspiring Mackenzie to write this letter. I hope wherever she is, she never found out the answer to her questions to Hef. What do you have to do to get in the mansion? You have to lose yourself, Mackenzie. You have to give up everything about you that makes you unique and special. You have to give up your mind and your opinions and any belief in choosing your own future. But mostly, you have to get really, really small.